Meghan Markle can no longer hide, and this time, the silence isn't protecting her, it's exposing her. Because what was once whispered behind palace walls is now unraveling in plain sight, piece by piece, as Lady C steps forward with claims so explosive they don't just question a narrative, they threaten to rewrite it entirely. It begins with a pattern small, almost dismissible details that suddenly refuse to stay small. Lady C points to a behavior Meghan Markle allegedly tried to bury, something subtle enough to escape headlines but persistent enough to raise eyebrows. A habit, a tendency, sticky fingers, she calls it, not metaphorically, literally, items that weren't hers, costumes, accessories. Personal styling tools allegedly slipping quietly into Meghan Markle's possession, never to return. And here's the unsettling part. This wasn't described as a one-time mistake. It was framed as a pattern, a rhythm, a quiet taking that blended into normalcy until someone finally noticed.
And Meghan actually has very sticky fingers.
Come on, sorry.
Because she's walked out before with shoes, and maybe the shoes were on her hands, but because she's walked out of shoots with things that it's been commented upon from long before she got married.
And suddenly, what sounded like gossip starts forming a timeline, because when multiple moments echo the same behavior, coincidence begins to look like strategy. Lady C claims Meghan Markle treated borrowed items as if ownership had simply transferred. No discussion, no permission, just assumption. And when you connect that to a reported incident involving $1,700 worth of designer clothing after a variety shoot clothing that allegedly wasn't returned, the question shifts. This isn't about fashion anymore. It's about entitlement, about blurred lines between access and ownership.
Now, I can tell you, as somebody who's been photographed for well over 50 years now, that sometimes you are invited to choose some of the dresses. But there are other times when it's made absolutely clear to you that under no circumstances will you be allowed to take any of them.
But that's just the surface, because Lady C doesn't stop at objects. She shifts focus to something far more powerful: attention. According to her, Meghan Markle doesn't just participate in charity, she redirects it. Every charitable moment, every carefully staged appearance allegedly circles back to one focal point: Meghan Markle herself. The cause becomes background, the mission fades, and the spotlight, it stays exactly where she wants it.
That it's been commented upon from long before she got married. So Meghan is very attached to, shall we say, freebies.
That's where it gets uncomfortable, because charity, by its nature, isn't supposed to feel like branding. But Lady C insists that every appearance, every carefully captured image feeds into something larger, a cultivated image, a personal narrative being reinforced again and again. And if that's true, then the question becomes unavoidable: was it ever about the cause?
Look at us, showing up and doing good. She's just sort of ramming it down our throats, isn't she, about how wonderful she is. Aren't I special? Aren't I great? Just like after the Los Angeles fires. Remember when she turned up there to look as if she was helping people? She thinks that we see her as some sort of angel on earth or something, doesn't she?
But I think that's what she wants us to see her as. But we don't. We see her as the total phony and the total contrivance that she is.
Then comes the shift. The story moves backward in time, tracing origins, not to a fairy tale beginning, but to something far more calculated. Lady C describes the relationship between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle not as spontaneous, but as orchestrated. And at the center of that origin story sits a name: Marcus Anderson. Soho House. Connections forming long before headlines ever noticed.
And I mean, she's tasteless with it as well. Because why do they have on Archewell clothing? They're promoting their own enterprise.
The pieces start aligning. A meeting, an introduction, a slow, deliberate build. Lady C admits there's no definitive proof for every step, but she doesn't need it, because the pattern again does the work. Strategic positioning, access to influence, a path that doesn't look accidental when viewed from a distance. And that's where the narrative takes a sharper turn.
Artist Soho House. Now, Meghan met, and I don't think this has come out particularly, but Meghan met Marcus Anderson in 2011 at Soho House and they became great friends.
Because Lady C isn't just describing connections. She's describing intent, a relentless climb, a willingness to remove obstacles, people included, if they no longer serve the trajectory. It's a claim that lands heavily, especially when she references Meghan Markle's relationship with her father during the wedding period. According to Lady C, distance wasn't emotional. It was functional. What happens when ambition overrides attachment?
Harry's meeting with Meghan was very carefully orchestrated. Gratis Soho house.
When relationships become stepping stones instead of bonds, Lady C suggests the answer is already visible, hidden in plain sight for those willing to look closely enough. And then, just when the narrative feels like it's settling into a pattern, it twists again. Because Lady C introduces something even more deliberate controversy as strategy. Not accidental missteps, not unfortunate timing. Intentional moments designed to provoke reaction. Bondi Beach becomes an example. The outfit, the setting, the predictable outrage. According to Lady C, none of it was random. That's when the story stops feeling like a series of claims and starts feeling like a system, a cycle. Create attention, sustain relevance, control narrative. And if that's the case, then every headline, every backlash, every moment of public scrutiny becomes something else entirely, not a consequence.
Meghan had a pretty interesting, to be polite, reputation. She certainly did. Meghan was a girl who knew that every feminine well should be used as she horizontally and vertically climbed that ladder.
But a tool. And here's where the silence gets loud. Because if all of this is coincidence, then it's a remarkable one. But if it isn't, then what we're looking at isn't chaos. It's design. And just when it feels like the pattern couldn't stretch any further, Lady C pushes it into the most guarded space of all the royal family itself, where perception isn't just important, it's everything. And where, according to Lady C, Meghan Markle's carefully constructed image began to fracture the moment it was tested against reality, because behind palace doors. The version of Meghan Markle that had been presented didn't quite match the one being experienced, and that realization, Lady C claims, didn't happen overnight but grew slowly, quietly, until even Queen Elizabeth could no longer ignore the difference between appearance and intention. A difference that, if true, suggests something far more calculated was at play than anyone initially believed. Lady C argues that Queen Elizabeth eventually felt something deeper than disappointment, something closer to betrayal, because the expectation had been clear: commitment, duty, alignment with the institution, yet what allegedly emerged instead was a completely different agenda, one that didn't revolve around service but around positioning. And if that's accurate, then the emotional weight of that realization becomes impossible to dismiss, because it reframes everything that followed not as conflict but as consequence. And suddenly, even the smallest decisions like distance, caution, restraint begin to look less like coldness and more like self-protection, especially when Lady C claims that Queen Elizabeth became increasingly wary of private conversations, fearing they could later resurface in interviews or documentaries, turning personal trust into public narrative. And then comes the tension surrounding access, because while public claims suggested closeness and unlimited connection, Lady C insists that reality told a different story, one where boundaries quietly replaced openness, where access was no longer automatic but controlled, and where even something as symbolic as photographs with Lily and Archie became complicated, avoided, withheld, not out of indifference but out of caution. And if that's true, then the silence surrounding those moments becomes deafening, because what isn't shown often reveals more than what is. The narrative tightens further when Lady C brings up the moment of Queen Elizabeth's passing, a moment that should have been defined by unity, but instead, according to Lady C, carried an undercurrent of urgency and fear. Not fear of the event itself, but of how it might be used. Because there were concerns, serious concerns, that Meghan Markle could shape the narrative if given the opportunity. And that possibility alone was enough to accelerate the official announcement, to control the timing, to ensure that the story began where the palace intended it to, not where it could be redirected. And if that sounds extreme, that's because it is. Because it suggests that even in a moment of national mourning, narrative control was still a battle being fought behind the scenes. Lady C suggests that this dynamic didn't go unnoticed, that Princess Catherine woman recognized something early, something that didn't align with the expected role Meghan Markle was supposed to embrace, and according to Lady C, that recognition created distance from the very beginning, a quiet awareness that something about Meghan Markle's presence wasn't as straightforward as it appeared. And if that's true, then the tensions that later became public weren't sudden, they were inevitable, building slowly beneath the surface long before anyone outside the palace could see them. And then the narrative reaches its most controversial point, the claim that refuses to stay quiet no matter how many times it's dismissed, because Lady C questions the circumstances surrounding Archie and Liette in a way that doesn't just raise eyebrows, it challenges the very foundation of what was publicly accepted, suggesting inconsistencies, pointing to the absence of traditional royal confirmations, and implying that something about the situation didn't follow the established pattern, and whether those claims are believed or rejected, they linger, because once a question like that is asked, it doesn't simply disappear. From there, the focus shifts again, this time to image, to perception, to the role security plays not just in protection but in presentation, because Lady C argues that visibility itself becomes part of the message, that large security details don't just protect Meghan Markle, they elevate Meghan Markle, creating an aura of importance that reinforces the image being projected, and if that's intentional, then even safety becomes part of the narrative strategy. And finally, Lady C returns to what might be the most uncomfortable thread of all, the idea that Meghan Markle's entire trajectory has been shaped by strategic relationships, carefully chosen connections that provided access, influence, and advancement, a claim that, when placed alongside everything else, transforms the story from a series of isolated controversies into something far more cohesive, far more deliberate, and far more difficult to dismiss as coincidence.